Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Douglas A. Elwell. Last name is spelled Elwell. And if you're watching this on X, Rockfin, or Rumble, you'll see the cover of his book, which he published in 2010. Title of the book is Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man, and the End of the Age. And then it says Planet X at the Creation, Nativity, and Second Coming. And you'll see his face right here if you're watching it also live. He's decided to go live on video. I'm in a hotel room, so I'm going to keep my my video off. But this is not his first book. It's not the first book he published. He also published a book about Ireland. It's titled Mysterious World, a new kind of travel guide to Ireland, and it's through his own imprint, Mysterious World Press. This is his second book, like I said, 2010. His latest one, or most recent, according to his Amazon bio, is The Riddle of the Sphinx, which explores the legend of a mysterious hall of records hidden under the Sphinx that some believe contains forbidden secrets from the world before the flood. And his website is planet-x.info, and I'll bring up his website too, so you can see that there. But this book is very interesting. I was reading through it. I do have a copy of it, and you can talk more about that. So, Doug Elwell, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So, for people who might have not have heard your name or not familiar with your work, maybe you can talk about your background, your books, your research, and what led up to the publication of Planet X in 2010.
Well, back when I was in college, I had the impression that Jesus was going to return in our lifetime. I'm a Christian conservative, just FYI. And the book itself is a Christian book written to a Christian audience primarily, but also to a general audience, talking about the Planet X theory as it applies to primarily the end times. My theory is that the sign of the Son of Man spoken of in Matthew 24:30 actually refers to another planet in our solar system which returns every 2,000 years or so. This is based on the Planet X theory, which is a mainstream scientific theory about a planet that invaded our solar system early in its history and has continued to appear in our heavens every 2,000 years or so, marking changes or major ages of mankind. The last time it appeared was as a Star of Bethlehem, and the next time it'll appear as a sign of the Son of Man, mentioned Matthew 24:30. And so my primary motivation for writing the book is to try to figure out if the Planet X theory actually does apply to that sign, to the Star of Bethlehem, and other sightings of stars in the ancient past, all the way going back all the way to ancient Sumer, where it may have appeared there, and they worshipped it as the most high god of their pantheon. I have a feeling every 2,000 years or so, God actually appears in the skies, on this planet, and then comes to the earth to visit mankind, to inaugurate new ages of mankind, and the next one is about to happen.
So you think that we're quite right on the cusp of a return of what's known as Planet X? Is that correct?
Yes, it's a herald God's return every 2,000 years.
Gotcha. And so this was talking about in the Babylonian. You talk about the Babylonian creation myth. It's like, what is the meaning of it? Enuma Elish.
Enuma Elish, there is a fringe researcher named Zechariah Sitchin, who in 1975 wrote a book called The 12th Planet. Now, by itself, it was more of a speculative, possibly realistic fiction almost, which might be true or partly true. When I was doing research into what the sign of the Son of Man was, and also the Star of Bethlehem, with the assumption it might have been the same object, I came across Sitchin's book when I was researching. I'd gone from the mainstream sources in Christian literature regarding what the Star of Bethlehem was, thinking it might give clues to what the sign of the Son of Man was. And I came across a book by Zechariah Sitchin called The 12th Planet. So I read that and found it a very interesting angle. Learned about the Babylonian creation epic, also known as Enuma Elish, and discovered his interpretation was that Enuma Elish was actually a description of a planet entering our solar system in ancient times and interacting catastrophically with a primordial Earth, striking it with one of its satellites and moving it to another location close to the sun. This was symbolically represented in the mythology of the ancient Babylonians and Sumerians as a great star god conflicting with a great dragon goddess, a dragon goddess representing the primordial earth, and the star god representing a planet that entered into our solar system from outside, colloquially known as Planet X. And Planet X, according to his theory, had actually divided Earth into two pieces and moved the larger piece, known or described as the head of Tiamat, the dragon, to a new location closer to the sun, where it is now. The original location of this Earth planet, the previous Earth, which was modified, was actually where the asteroid belt is now. And that's why we have debris still in the asteroid belt area, enough to notice, but not enough to be the remnants of a complete planet. It's only partial remnants. In fact, it's the remnants, the amount of material to be found in the asteroid belt is maybe 1/10 of the size of our moon. So it's not nearly large enough to create a planet, indicating that possibly the planet that it formed there originally had been moved. And evidence has shown that most likely that might have been the case, because asteroidal and comet material is shown to have come from the inner solar system, most likely from a planet in the inner solar system. Now, we figured that out since that time, and so the evidence seems to be pointing towards that possibility.
Gotcha. And yeah, that's kind of an important, you mentioned the dragon, that's kind of an important theme in the intro of your book, like this casting out of the dragon from Leviathan. And
right.
Can you talk about that?
The ancient Near Eastern concept, amazing around Mesopotamia, just in ancient Canaan, Persia, also the Sumerians before them, and to some extent the Egyptians even. The concept of the creation was that the earth was created from the head of a dragon. The dragon was symbolic of the previous earth, and the various planets are actually represented by various deities as they are to this day. Mars, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, those are all the names of Roman gods. And so the ancient tradition was there was 12 gods and 12 planets, and there were battles between the gods in the heavens, which resulted in various cataclysms, which reflected themselves in astronomical portents, conjunctions, appearances of comets, and so forth. So the ancients would think that the things that were happening in the skies were actually the interplay and interaction.
I just lost you there. I don't know what happened to your audio. Can you hear me? Doug? Yeah, your audio just clipped out. Doug, can you hear me? Doug. Doug. Doug, I can't hear you. Doug.
Goddess who was causing problems for the other gods.
Doug, your audio just clicked out for about 3 minutes, so you'll have to go back and start again. You couldn't hear me talking at all, huh?
No, I had a telephone call I had to cancel.
Okay, sorry. Well, that's probably what it was. You have to go back for three minutes and start over again.
Okay. Do you remember where I started?
You were talking about the ancient gods, dragon, with the dragon symbolism in the Old Testament, and the battle that's kind of like divine conflict is where you left off.
Okay. You're asking about what the dragon was, correct?
That was the question that led to that, but you were kind of talking about the divine conflict.
Okay. The divine conflict was basically a conflict between a sky god and a dragon goddess. The sky god appears as a star, or actually more accurately, a planet in the heavens, and it would interact with and conflict with this dragon goddess, and the result was the creation of the earth. And that was a kind of a universal theme behind everything, the cosmology of all the ancient Mesopotamian belief systems of how the earth was created. The Egyptians had somewhat of a similar thing in some other myths, but it was mainly Mesopotamian and Canaanite mythology and Hittite mythology and Persians that believed that. And so basically that was how things were seen by the ancients. as the earth was created by this divine conflict. It shows up in Psalm 74 and alluded to in Genesis 1 that there was a conflict between God and the dragon that led to the creation of the earth. The dragon shows up variously in the Bible as the dragon, as Leviathan, as Rahab. And that shows up in the creation passages consistently, especially in the book of Job, which I believe is actually the biblical version or the equivalent of an Elish, the biblical creation epic. In fact, in the book, in chapter 6, I talk about how Job was actually the Hebrew creation epic and should be considered to be a parallel text to an Elish, but it's its own unique take on the same creation material. That's because Abraham, who was taken out of Ur the Chaldees, which was the capital of Sumer, he lived around 2000 BC. When he was taken out of Ur the Chaldees, which was destroyed shortly after by fire from heaven, he was taken out of there, and with him he brought his version of the creation epic, which was a monotheistic version. And a monotheistic version was the book of Job was just that basically God was talking to mankind, and mankind was various men. Job and his friends were talking about the various ways that God created the earth and the way he operates. If you translate it in the context of an Elish, it actually has a lot more creation material in it. So actually, for chapter 6 of the book about Job, which I call Job the Hebrew creation epic, it actually has a huge amount more creation material than previously thought, and numerous references to the dragon and also references to God's use of the dragon to create the heavens and the earth. Very much parallel with ancient Near Eastern mythology and making the Bible much more in tune with ancient texts of its time.
Gotcha. So these are all kind of old things. And your view is that the Star of Bethlehem was like a literal planet. It wasn't some sign from outside of our kind of solar system or something
Right.
like that. Is that correct? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, one of the reasons I think that is when I did my original research on the Star of Bethlehem, there's a number of books written on the subject, and they all mainly came down to three different solutions for what the Star of Bethlehem was. It was actually a supernova, a conjunction of planets, or a comet. And so, looking at the narrative of Matthew 2, supernova doesn't really work, nor does supernova doesn't work because the Star of Bethlehem was seen to be moving relative to the background stars, basically moving before the Magi and showing them where the Messiah had been born in Bethlehem. Since supernova are part of fixed background stars, it would not have been able to move relative to the background stars, so that one was not going to count. Also, supernova only show up for a couple of days and they dim quickly. Conjunction of planets, there's conjunction of planets that happen all the time. They're not really special. In my lifetime, I've seen Jupiter and Saturn conjoin, and it wasn't very spectacular. All they did was kind of pass close to each other, and in a couple of days they were far away from each other again. For the Magi to follow a star, it would have to be visible for probably a couple of months, because they had to come all the way from Persia and make it all the way to Bethlehem in order to actually meet those criteria. Not only does it have to move background relative to the background stars, it actually has to be around for a couple of months so it could be followed. And so the third version, the comets only last for a couple of weeks typically, and they also are harbingers of evil in the ancient Near Eastern thought. And so they'd be inappropriate for the birth of the Messiah. So really none of the major theories worked, so I wasn't sure where to go from there. Since the object had to move background relative to the background stars, that means it had to be relatively close, actually part of our solar system. And it had to be fairly large, and it had to stick around for a couple of months at least so the Magi could follow it. The only candidate that would fit that would be a planet. So but there wasn't a planet I was aware of that acted that way. I thought maybe Jupiter was that, but it didn't quite fit either, and it was a common sight in the heavens, so it's obviously not a good candidate either. So when I came across the Planet X theory, where the Planet X is this planet that comes into our solar system from outside, enters the inner solar system quickly, leaves quickly, maybe only a few months or maybe a year or two, it was a good candidate for the Star of Bethlehem because it would move relative to the background stars, plus it would also be very bright, and it would be gone most of the time, so it would be a unique event that would herald the birth of the King of the universe. Plus, the possibility, for example, Abraham's birth was heralded by a star also. And so that happened roughly 2,000 years before Christ. And so that's why I believe it has a 2,000-year orbit. It appeared possibly 2,000 years before Christ, and another 2,000 years before that, it showed up prominently in the religion of the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, who worshipped a star in the heavens as a god. They called it Nibiru, the star of the crossing, something that appears only occasionally. And so every 2,000 years or so, possibly 2,000 years after Christ, which is, it's late right now. It's about 25 years late according to that. But it's possible it may appear in our lifetime, once again appearing roughly every 2,000 years, meeting criteria of past appearances.
Gotcha. And one of the interesting things about the New Testament, the advent of Christ, is this magi. So it kind of fits in with your view of astronomy and things like that. Like, who are the magi? They were following this planet, as you say, or this sign in the heavens, and angels. Can you maybe talk about them in their context of the New Testament?
The Magi are basically an existing caste of astrologers and priests that lived in ancient Persia. They're very well known back then. They were unique to Persia, even though there were wise men in every country, like the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and those that came after them. The Magi are actually a caste, an actual people who lived in ancient Persia. They're well documented in history as the priests of Persia who performed all the rituals, kept all the knowledge. They were kind of an elite class, so a second only to the royal class. And so the Magi fit in perfectly to the narrative, and they actually existed. So that's more proof that the Matthew narrative was accurate, because the Magi did exist, and they were highly respected wise men of that time. And so, and they also, most importantly, worshiped the stars and studied them carefully as ancient astronomers. And so them following the star of Bethlehem to Israel would have made perfect sense. And they would have been the only people, maybe the best people in the world to do that. Interestingly, the Magi recognized Jesus as the Messiah and were the only people to recognize the star for what it was, even though the ancient Hebrew priests were supposed to remember that. Only the Magi actually did, because their tradition was actually more faithful to the ancient tradition than the Hebrews were themselves. And so part of that narrative was kind of a polemic against the priests of that time, because they were so clueless. They didn't know the signs when they showed up, and that was their one job they were supposed to do, and they failed at it. And so it was kind of a knock against the priests of that time to say they were basically clueless and hopeless and need to be replaced. And that was kind of
a foreshadowing or something?
Foreshadowing a place, background set up to show that they're going to be replaced by Christianity, and Jesus was the first step towards that goal.
Wow, that's amazing. So the traditional names for people who don't know of the Magi are Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. I don't think they're mentioned, those names particularly in the New Testament, but those are kind of those are the traditional names. But you also kind of talk about, you mentioned the divine conflict, but this kind of like you think that this kind of the creation myth, the advent of Christ, and the end days all kind of tie together, right?
Correct. Like I said, the pattern is every 2,000 years or so, plus or minus 100 years, I would say, because the planet X interacts with outer planets and it affects their orbits, and they affect its orbit. In fact, it says in Matthew 24 that the powers of the heaven will be shaken right before the sign of the Son of Man appears. What that literally means, the powers of the heavens is actually referring to the planets. And so only a planet-sized object could affect the orbits of the planet significantly. And so it's kind of a proof that sign of the Son of Man has to be a planet, because nothing else would do that unless God sent out his hand and just literally moved the planets. Planet X would be required, and one could argue that Planet X is kind of the hand of God in a sense of something that he uses to achieve his goals, which it is. And so Planet X, in my opinion, is the greatest weapon in God's war against Satan. It'll be kind of a war of the worlds, literally. There will not only be battle between the planets. So there'll also be kind of opposing fleets. I mean, the implication, I think it's Revelation 19, is when Jesus returns on his white horse surrounded by his armies, that there's going to be a space fleet accompanying this planet. It's not dissimilar to a kind of a Star Wars scenario, except in this case, the good guys are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys, depending on your point of view, of course. But for me as a Christian, the coming planet with its space fleet will be the ones I'll actually be a part of that fleet. And so it's going to be an interesting experience, to say the least. But the end times and the beginning times are routinely matched symbolically. For example, the mentions of the dragon in the New Testament are reflections of the dragon in the Old Testament, Leviathan, Rahab, or just the dragon. The dragon is actually alluded to in Genesis 1. Moses had to demythologize the Old Testament. He was certainly familiar with the Nume Elish, having had access to all the great libraries of the world, having lived in Egypt. So what he did was, instead of saying God defeated the dragon, he said God created the heavens and the earth, and the spirit brooded over the face of the deep. The word for deep he used there was the word for deep water, which is Tihom. Tihom is cognate to the name of the Babylonian deity Tiamat, which was the name of the dragon that Marduk defeated in the Babylonian version of the creation epic. And so he kind of sneakily put Tiamat in the narrative of Genesis 1, taking away the AT at the end, which made it a proper noun, and turned it Tiamat, which means Lady Sea or Mrs. Sea, or the sea goddess. And just, it was without the at the end, it becomes Tihom, which just means the deep sea. And this happens a lot in the Bible, where the deities are demythologized, like Baal goes from being a god to just being Lord. Ashtaroth goes from being a goddess to just being the increase of the flock. The Bible has a tendency to demythologize the gods of the nations frequently. I mean, it happens quite a bit more than you might think. If you look for it, it's all over the place. And so the Bible is a demythologized monotheistic version of the Babylonian creation epic. And it's all about the revival of the dragon in the end times and all those ancient symbols. The dragon rises again in the end. God has to defeat the dragon again. It's his heavenly sign appearing in the heavens once again to defeat the dragon. And so the symbology is pretty much identical. In fact, the author, John the Revelator, did a very good job of reviving the old dragon myth and using it effectively to describe the powers of evil. And now the sky god that we now know as Jesus returns and defeats the dragon once more.
Interesting. And you mentioned Job. So that's another kind of furtherance of this creation myth, right? I've never seen it in that or perceived Job in that context.
In my opinion, Job was probably an oral tradition brought down by Abraham from very ancient times. All the old stories were already oral traditions. They weren't written down until later. And so they had the whole thing memorized. And probably Job was sung or chanted. And every year they went through the entire book and just did the whole thing as part of their annual rituals, New Year's rituals. The Enuma Elish was the annual New Year festival that the Babylonians celebrated as part of their New Year's ritual, which included giant figures of the dragon and Marduk, which was their version of Planet X, the sky god. And they would battle against each other, the various deities. There was a number of different deities in the Babylonian creation epic, and they would all walk around and sing and have their say in the drama. And they would have a parade, literally. It's really the Babylonian version of the part of the celebration. It's kind of a combination of the New Year's parade, a religious festival, and the Super Bowl all in one. And I suspect the Hebrews had a similar tradition, except they didn't have giant gods portrayed as various pantomime figures or possibly symbolic figures on top of poles. They would actually bring out the Ark of the Covenant and parade that around and celebrate God's victory over the dragon that way. And so in ancient Mesopotamia, the New Year's festival is all about celebration of God's victory over the dragon, as happened every year. And that's what Enuma was really all about in terms of the religious beliefs of the Babylonians. Was part of their New Year's ritual for remembering who defeated the dragon and created the earth. It was the Most High God. They made the mistake of replacing God with their various state deities, which in the case of the Babylonians was Marduk, and in the case of the Sumerians, it was Anu or Enlil. The Persians celebrated the Babylonian creation epic, their version of it. They said Ahura Mazda was the defeater of the dragon, and so forth. And so every major empire took on the ancient creation tradition. They replaced the Most High God with their Most High God instead of the true God. And so much of the knowledge was retained, but idolatry had invaded it. So the biblical version was the only true version, which retains the knowledge of the one true God, and also a monotheistic, more kind of actually scientific version of the creation tradition, because they cut out all these deities. And sun and moon, for the first time in any tradition, are just seen as physical objects that were not deities.
Interesting.
And it's really the first scientific document where you had religion and science separated.
Wow, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. And it's also interesting too, is that a lot of those other creation stories that are outside the Bible also had flood story too, right?
Almost the flood story is the most common story on Earth. It's absolutely everywhere. Even the ancient Hopi, who have they actually have several. Their ancient history actually shows an ancient history very similar to that of the biblical version. The ancient Hopi were a Native American people in southwestern United States, mainly in Arizona, and they actually have a flood story too. It's all over the place. Every major tradition, every major culture, and many of the minor ones, Native Americans, everybody, have a flood story. It's quite amazing. East, West, everyone. And so the flood story is the most well-attested story of the ancient world, and is so well documented that it's hard to refute it. It's not a question of whether or not there was a flood. It was a question of whether or not it was universal. In my opinion, the Great Flood was primarily about the Mediterranean region. The Mediterranean basin used to be an open area, which was an extremely fertile plain, like a valley, that was separated from the Atlantic by a huge wall called the Atlantic Wall by geologists. Then sometime around the Ice Age, at the beginning of the Ice Age, something happened, so the Atlantic Wall collapsed and the Atlantic just flooded in and flooded the Mediterranean basin. But prior to that, it was an open, vast, fertile plain, which the Nile continued to flow into and actually went west across what is now the Mediterranean Sea. And they found the river valley also, and also a number of ancient artifacts and prehistoric monuments all over the Mediterranean seas, the bottom of it. And so the Mediterranean used to be above water until there was a catastrophe that happened during the Ice Age. And I think the destruction of that major civilization, the only remains of which are Malta and some other places, was totally destroyed. And that's probably primarily the civilization that was destroyed by the flood, but evidence suggests there was flooding all over the world during the Ice Age. And so probably the main myth is about the destruction of that ancient civilization, and also the general flooding of the world during that time at the end of the Ice Age and the massive flooding that brought with it.
Wow, incredible. I'm going to read Matthew 24, 29, 30. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So you believe that there will be a return of this planet, and that you're not the only person who's researched Planet X. Like, you show that in your book, right? So other people have looked into this, but
not in the biblical context.
Okay.
Now, Sitchin talked about the dragon conflict, but he did not talk about an equation with the Star of Bethlehem. I think I'm the first person who made that distinction. He might have somewhere, but I never saw it. But he talked about it as being the creation used by God to create the earth. But he did not talk about it being the sign of the Son of Man or the Star of Bethlehem that I'm aware of. And so I think I'm the first person to make that distinction. But he did definitely made correlations between the creation of the earth. God had used Planet X to do that, which I believe he was correct. Sitchin was so right on with that that I wonder. Zechariah Sitchin was actually a Jewish man who was from the area of Azerbaijan, which is between Persia and the Caucasus region, northwest of Persia. And he was also a Freemason. My theory is that he actually inherited an ancient creation tradition from the Magi, because the Magi weren't that far away from there. And the Freemasons were the kind of people who would kind of carry on the Magi tradition. They're the kind of people who do exactly that sort of thing. And so my guess is that he picked up that tradition of the gods as planets, and there were conflicts in the heavens. And the Magi may have had a fairly advanced understanding of the solar system, and how it actually works, how it's solar centric, and how the Earth revolves around the sun. And there are other planets, and Planet X actually conflicted with those planets as it entered into our solar system. I suspect they had at least a basic understanding of how that worked. And so Sitchin probably took that tradition, possibly part of a timed release that was planned for the future, which is now what we call 1975, as a prelude to the next return of the Planet X, which would happen within the next 50 years from that time. And so that was actually 50 years this year, but he published it in 1975. So I wonder if Planet X research will start becoming more important. Planet X will actually appear, I think it's described in the sixth seal. It'll become visible from Earth to the naked eye. When it says, as the sixth seal is opened, there was a huge hailstorm, which is basically an asteroid shower or meteorite shower. Massive amounts of asteroids hit the Earth and actually dislodged the crust, so that all the entire crust is dislodged temporarily, and this causes all the islands and the mountains to shift. In fact, the entire Earth's crust shifts. And then it says the throne of God appears in heaven, and the chief men and the captains and the mighty men ask the mountains to bury them underneath them, to protect them from the one on the throne in heaven. And so the throne in heaven might actually be Planet X first appearing, and they see this planet coming, and it's a terrible sight to behold, because, as it said in that passage in Matthew 24, all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and Jesus will come in the clouds in heaven. Those clouds are the massive wings of Planet X, which are actually two huge comet tails. They're so huge, as Planet X comes close, it'll actually fill the sky from horizon to horizon. And even when it's coming on its way, and it hasn't come yet, those comet tails might be so huge, they might be larger and brighter than the moon at its first appearance. And from that point, midway through the tribulation, it keeps getting bigger and bigger the entire time. Really, this is the ultimate psychological terror weapon that's coming at you every single day and every single night. It can be seen in a day too, probably. And so that's God building up to the final battle, using a great deal of psychological warfare, not to mention all the asteroids and comets that are striking the Earth as part of the trumpet judgments. So this is really God softening up the Earth for the final battle, both psychologically and physically.
What do you see in current events that kind of validate we're moving towards the end of time, or the sign of the Son of Man?
Well, we'll see these consolidation of the Earth under one powerful leader. There's seals will basically be mankind consolidating the power under one powerful leader. I consider the possibility that Donald Trump is actually the first horseman, that he is actually the one who conquers and goes forth to conquer. He's obviously being set up for a massive conquest. He's going to have to clean up the deep state. He's going to have to take out some of our enemies, maybe take on the Russians and others in north of Israel. They're actually in Syria and have been there for a while. And they occupy the territory between there and Russia. And so the Russians have been making their way down to Israel for years, really decades. And they're poised on the northern frontiers to invade any time. In fact, they're disputing the Golan Heights area as possibly theirs. Golan Heights is an area in northeastern Israel, the ancient tribal lands of Dan, the tribe of Dan. And we recently overthrew the Syrian government. And so I think maybe we're getting set up for the Gog and Magog war, which President Trump may end up fighting and winning on our behalf. And so he's going to end up being sort of a hand of God in that situation, and be the first, the white horseman who will start off the tribulation after a 7-year treaty is signed. So Once the 7-year treaty is signed, either right before the Gog-Magog War or possibly right after it, as a result of the Gog-Magog War may be the trigger for the need for a 7-year treaty, then it's going to go forth and start uprooting and destroying all these bad actors. It's possibly is also the little horn mentioned in Daniel, the one who uproots the other 3 horns. In my opinion, the 7-headed dragon is the G7 economic powers, and the 10 horns in the dragon's head are the 10 nuclear powers. Right now, there are 9 nuclear powers, including Israel. The 10th one would be Iran as soon as it creates a nuclear weapon. Once it does that, you'll have 10 horns. And Donald Trump is probably the little horn, and he'll uproot the 3 horns, 3 of those nuclear powers, one of which will be Iran. The other one will probably be North Korea, and the third one, possibly Israel, or maybe Pakistan or India, one of those 2. It might be that India will fall under a nuclear umbrella, and they'll disarm as part of a treaty with them and others in that region. But in either case, I think Trump's going to have a prominent place in the end times as a good actor and necessary person to take care of certain things that are required for the second coming.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of the stuff is happening in the plains of Megiddo. So according to the biblical kind of worldview, there'll be things happening on the earth and the skies as the world the return of Jesus Christ is predicted in the New Testament, right?
All kinds of stuff. In fact, the signs we're seeing with those drones might be an example of the signs. It says blood and fire and pillars of smoke. One of the reasons, the idea that I have is that the giant impact which created the moon was actually created as a giant impactor, as was proven by scientists. Back in 1981, there was a conference in Kona, Hawaii, where all the scientists who studied the moon and how it was formed came together and came to the conclusion that it was formed as a result of a giant impactor roughly the size of Mars. Not Mars itself, but an impactor the size of Mars. Struck Earth, embedded itself deep in the Earth's core, where it is to this day, and in the process ejected a lot of Earth's mantle and crust. And that material was caught into orbit around the Earth, and it cooled and solidified and formed the moon. They found since that time that the moon is actually made out of the crust and mantle of Earth, and so they've been able to prove that. But also, all the asteroids and the comets were probably formed at that same time, and all the asteroids and the near-Earth asteroids and the asteroids in the belts, and the comets, both near-Earth comets and ones that go in and out of the solar system, all of those originate from the original Earth. That implies that it's also possible that there was life, primitive life on the Earth at that time, possibly the dinosaurs or something even more primitive. And so if something did strike Earth at that time, things would have been, any life on Earth would have been pulverized and powdered and flash frozen and thrown into space. And as a result, as Planet X returns, a lot of that floating material in space comes along with it. And so we might start going through huge fields of pulverized plant and animal matter, which will start falling as a red rain. And that explains why it says blood and fire and pillars of smoke. What's happening is a lot of this asteroidal material in comets has animal material as part of the whole mixture. And as these asteroids and comets enter Earth's atmosphere, that pulverized animal material reconstitutes with the water and falls as sort of a red rain. This happens occasionally when asteroids fall and comets fall right now. And this will happen a lot more in the end times. And that's why blood and fire and pillars of smoke go together, is because the fire and pillar of smoke is the result of an asteroid striking the Earth. And the pillar of smoke is the massive, cloud that's thrown up by it. And the blood, of course, is the blood that rains out from the materials that entered the Earth and reconstituted and formed the red rain.
Right. So in Matthew, one of the things you even just mentioned is a thing that I think if you're a Christian would be the opposite or counterintuitive. Why did the people of the earth mourn when they see Christ come back to the earth at the end times?
They mourn because at first it said that the Jews will mourn the Messiah when they see him coming. That might be part of it because they realized they were wrong and they had to repent, which they will do, which is good. But mourning, and I think in the broader sense, is they were terrified of this thing coming. It might say, instead of mourning, it might be the tribes of the earth are terrified of what's happening because they realize they're up against an unwinnable enemy. They cannot defeat something so vast. And the armies with it are also totally superior to our own. Even with Space Force, we're not going to be able to defeat them. And so I think they're terrified of realizing that they're going to lose. And so they're going to have to, more in the sense of repent, more in the sense of be terrified, more in the sense of, you know what, we should probably give up and accept the rule of Jesus because he has, irresistible force with him. And even if we did win, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. We'd probably be almost totally destroyed. And so it'd be better to try to make a deal with him. The Antichrist, of course, will not make a deal, and it'll end up in a massive disaster. But Christ will repent before the end to make sure that all life is not lost. The Bible actually says if the wars of that time and the tribulation of that time didn't end, all life on earth would be destroyed. And in fact, one of the bowl judgments, I think, ends up with all life in the seas being destroyed. I suspect that what that is that near the end, there's a nuclear exchange between the remaining submarines, and the amount of devastation of life under the sea is so great, it's literally exterminated. And the earth or the seas have become so radioactive, it'll be impossible for any life to survive.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The whole end story is like so many things coming together, including the return and all of this things. And people, it's interesting, like people were talking about biblical prophecy even 100 years ago before the establishment of Israel. They're like, how could all this happen? And then you see these incredible movements. Like the plains of Megiddo were right there, like just like you talked about, Syria and Lebanon. It's right there. And they're disputing it right now, like the conflict. And all eyes are on Israel. This huge Gaza event, and it's biblical. It's like biblical time.
As you say, it's all lining up, but it's never been more lined up than it is today.
Yeah. Doug, we are at the 45-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything you missed before we wrap it up?
No, I'd just like to give out the website. You can visit www.planet-x.info. That's planet.x.info. You can also see some of my older work for free on a website I used to do called Mysterious World at mysteriousworld.com/journal, JOURNAL.
And I will put links to both of those sites on the show notes. And this will go out today. And is it through your website, planet-x.info, that people can contact you if they have any follow-up questions or anything? I actually have a follow-up question right here from the dude abides. He asks, should we be worried? How do we prepare? Do you have any thoughts on that?
First of all, you should accept Christ as your Savior, and that way you'll be resurrected. I don't believe in the pre-trib rapture. There's no evidence for that, in my opinion. We'll be resurrected at the seventh trumpet, as described in Revelation 14. So, but in terms of preparation to that time, because that'll be probably around the 6th or 7th year of the tribulation period, you need to basically find a hideout somewhere in the wilderness. I recommend the Missouri or Arkansas Ozarks, where I think most of Christianity will flee to in the end times. Revelation 12, in my opinion, is the description of the remnant fleeing west across the Mississippi into Missouri and possibly Arkansas. The crossing point is probably where the Piasa creature is in Alton, Illinois, if you're curious, if you ever want to research that. There's actually a story about the Piasa bird, Piasa, in mysteriousworld.com, which I recommend you read that also. So the remnant will flee west across the Mississippi, and the last redoubt of Christianity on earth will probably be in the Ozarks. So I recommend buying land there, putting in a bunker, and prepare for the worst, and dig deep, and have lots of storable food. Learn how to hunt for animals and do fishing, and also purifiable water. Be near a source of pure water or relatively pure, and be prepared to hunker down for several years. That's the only way you're going to survive.
Have you moved there yet?
No, but I plan to once I get enough money to do so.
Yeah, no kidding.
It depends. Things aren't going so well in Illinois. It's competing with. I live in Illinois. It's competing with California for being the most liberal crackpot state in the union. So we may not be able to stay here for too much longer. I wonder Well, if they want Christians here at all, sometimes.
You guys have nothing on California. It's way worse than you would think.
Oh yeah.
No, it's terrible.
I'll take a California and raise you a little boy.
That'll be our next show. We'll dispute which one is a bigger group of lunatics. I mean, the stuff they pass here is off the charts. Free health care, no, you can steal stuff up to $850. I mean, it feels like the end of the world, end of a world. There's no question about it. And these fires and all that stuff.
You have the most fruits and nuts, but I think we have some of the most crazy government people. Wow. We'll see what happens.
We have a lot. We have a lot here. I mean, the other thing is that I've lived here for 50 years, so I've seen the radical change within one generation. It's changed incredibly for the worse. But that's a whole nother show. Again, we talked this show with Doug A. Elwell, Elwell, about his End Times book. And the title of that book, again, is Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man at the End and at the End of the Age. Planet X at the Creation, Nativity, and Second Coming. Check it out. Go get the book. I'll put links to his website, planet-x.info, and you can follow up and ask him any questions if you wish to do so at that website, correct?
There's a chat. There's a function you can submit questions through the website at planet-x.info.
Cool. Awesome. Doug A. Elwell, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, stay there.